would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Let me see about the volume here. Get it up a little bit. Okay. Now, I just kind of let everybody know where I've kind of been. I've been dealing with my dog having cancer. I have a grandfather that has cancer. And between that, work, also running around helping other family members out. I've been pretty busy. And with my dog having cancer, being a dog, it's not like every town's got some type of, treatment center or nothing. So I'm having to go to a university. And anybody that knows me knows how skeptical I am about medical treatments and all that. So I've been very involved in what we're going to do and go about this. Plus, I've had my alternative naturalist, people that I've talked to things that between what I'm having done at the university and then what I'm doing here at home that won't affect each other in any type of negative way. So that's one thing that I've been doing. But if you've been wondering where I've been, that pretty much sums up. I've been extremely busy and extremely broke. Now, what I want to get into the economy, the stock market, where we're at, and there's a lot of optimism out there. And I don't want to shoot down optimism. I want people to be optimistic, but in a construct of reality, not some fallacy that, oh, things are going to turn back to normal and all this. I think you leave out a lot of issues, and one still being that the Fed is in control of the dollar. Now, this only being one part of the issue, it's something that myself and others, including Ron Paul, have talked about forever. Ron Paul, the whole movement that, 06, 07 leading up to the 08 election, became a big cry from the Ron Paul people, and that was "End the Fed." And if you haven't read Ron Paul's book about the Fed, I really urge you to go read that. It's I like to call it a quick summary of the Fed, how it works and what it is and why it's bad for us. But if you want to get real deep into the history and who's behind it and why they did things and really get into the depth of it, check out The Creature from Jekyll Island. And that one will really go a lot farther into depth. So those two books, if you really want to get into the Fed, start off with Ron Paul's and then go into The Creature from Jekyll Island. And I think that most of my listeners probably have read or understand a lot about the Fed. So when I'm looking at the stock market, when I'm looking at, unemployment is down, which is good. That's really good. Unless you're on the left, then you think unemployment should be 100% and no one should have to work. And then, well, since you don't get to dictate how much you earn by how hard you work or what, risk you take as a person to make more money to not only provide for yourself and your family, but to even give more luxury to that. The government, according to the left, everybody will just get a, universal income. And I just don't see how society survives that. Because, and people go, well, animals aren't expected to work. Actually, animals are expected to work. Matter of fact, a lot of times animals work the majority of the time, getting their food, keeping their community safe, movement, they're active. And that's simply for survival. Do they play? Yeah, they, especially the young. But a lot of times you don't see the adults playing, but they think, you should become an adult and be able to just play like you're still in high school. That would be a utopia, a fallacy that they always claim that Ron Paul supporters were wanting. Oh, you're a Ron Paul supporter. You believe in that libertarian fallacy and this utopia. Actually, no, that's absolutely not. But, as we know, a lot of times they are often what they claim the other side to be. So they claim that, because we believe in libertarianism, that also we believe in some utopia. It is completely untrue. We just understand that government, monopolization of authority, has never actually solved the problems. In circumstances, it has reduced the problem, but it's never solved the problem. And when it's reduced the problem, it's only because the government will hold one side, down. They'll put their foot on your head and hold you down to the ground. And we've seen that in a lot of dictatorial countries where, oh, look, and we've talked about on here, look, it was more peaceful under that dictator. Okay, yes, it was more peaceful than us waging war, killing innocent people, and destroying cities. They have nothing to come back to. Or before even, if you weren't the in group, you were allowed to exist to some point, and that's not to say, these dictators were good, absolutely not. And people are like, well, they got rid of the dictator. There's your libertarian utopia. In the libertarian ideology, there's no, call for complete destructions of countries. So yeah, that's not a libertarian. And a libertarian that believes in non-aggression principle, you don't just go around being offensive in the terms of, striking people for no reason. Only defensive. If someone comes striking you, you're allowed to strike back. But that's not what happened. We go, hey, we need a, change of the ruling class in this country. So we'll stage all these different things and either kill him or arrest him. Oh, well, we tried to arrest him, but we had to kill him. So, But you look at the left, and then they're like, oh, yeah, we want to make technology to the point you ain't got to do nothing. We'll give you, $400 a week, and, you don't even have to work for that $400 a week. It basically locks people in to whatever class you're in. So now, well, the middle class and the lower class, well, they worked, or you can go to the real low class that they will absolutely never work, and people, that's wrong. People would love to work, but there's just there's people out there that absolutely will not work. There's people that say, I can't make this much, or I'll lose my food stamps. Even though within another, 6 months, they could be making more than what those food stamps provide them. They don't want to have to work that hard to get to that point. They rather just collect. But a lot of the middle class and a good percentage of the lower class people, they're all hardworking people. And I want to get into that a little bit further, but I really want to kind of cover the possible Fed crisis coming ahead, and we'll get in this Ron Paul Liberty report here, and we'll cover it after this, and we'll go further into where I see things going. So let's go ahead and dive into this Ron Paul Liberty.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Chris Rosini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Today we'd like to spend some time on an issue I've spent 30 or 40 years thinking about and trying to rein in, and that is the Federal Reserve and the power of the Federal Reserve, and trying to find out what they're doing, just asking for an audit of the Fed. So it's a big issue, and even when I started, I didn't realize how big an issue it really is, and it continues to be, and it's significantly related to civil liberties, war, welfare, the whole works, and the deep state as well. And so we're going to sort of break this down into three different eras. Of course, the Fed is the principal culprit in our scenario here, and the Fed, of course, most people know it was started in 1913 as a consequence of some problems that the banks and state banking systems created, and they had booms and busts, and they said, well, what we need is a central bank, and they got together and created the Fed, which came into existence under Woodrow Wilson in 1913. And though there were warnings at that time, it just didn't happen overnight, because the goal really was to make sure there was no free market money or free market interest rates, and that they would have total control of an economy. And big government and dictatorships need that. They essentially always take over control of the money system, and they always have these very, very strict legal tender laws. So we have this period of time that we'll start with, Chris, of 1913, and I take it up to 1971. And that was a period of time where systematically, from the very beginning, the Fed started destroying any relationship of our currency to gold, which was achieved. So why don't you go from there and tell us what you think about this Federal Reserve system and what they have been doing, and why people should be awakened to the fact that this is a big problem, and that we have to continue to study this and continue to warn people of the dangers of central banking.
Yes, and we could start from today. Today, the U.S. government and its military empire are the biggest government and empire in the history of the world. So how did they get to this point? And we can go back to 1913 when they started separating gold from money to use their paper money instead. And the purpose is so that government can create and finance itself, which is the worst thing in the world. You never want government to be able to finance itself. We should be the ones that should hold the purse strings, either personally or through our representatives. They don't want any restraints. So we have a monetary system of empire. And unfortunately, there's really nothing, in my opinion, that can be done to stop it. But there is a good plus side to this. Every empire in history always ends because they run up against supply and demand, economic law. That's what always puts it to rest.
And the self-destruction of the currency if they mess up. And, the motivation is something to think about. Why do they do this? And there's motivation. It's not like they haven't thought it through and they don't have a purpose. We should think about that, even though the purpose, from my viewpoint, is never very honorable. But it's the people who want a free lunch. That's the reason they like to have free money and not worry about deficits. So the Fed is necessary for those in the welfare system, and that includes the corporate welfare as well. So the subsidy that comes from the Fed and the creation of money and artificial interest rates supports crony capitalism. And that, of course, is a deadly problem because it creates the malinvestment and the maldistribution of wealth, and you have the rich becoming richer and the poor, and the wiping out of the middle class. So it's very, very serious. The other reason people like it might even be some who are sort of academically minded, but they like power. And this is where the power is, because, the Congress is limited in what they can spend and how much debt they have if they don't have a Federal Reserve system. They have to tax people, and that usually brings a halt to this much sooner. But as soon as the government, as soon as the Congress spends money, then it's dumped on the Fed, and the Fed has to monetize. So it's a collusion, it's a conspiracy, it's been around, and it has systematically gotten worse from 1913. Of course, immediately after 1913, they financed us unnecessarily getting into World War I. And then, of course, that inflation created a depression in 1921, which was short-lived because back then they didn't believe in bailing out everybody. But they went right back to inflating through the 20s, creating another bubble, a stock market bubble that ended with a crisis. And then the depression was ushered in, and everything they did was wrong. Republicans and Democrats and central banking. So what did they do then? They with an executive order, Roosevelt took all the gold from the people at $20 an ounce, and then he remonetized it $35 an ounce. So it's very mischievous from the very early on, and then they limped along, and then it was changed significantly after World War II. We had the advantages of not being clobbered in World War II. So at the end of World War II, they had this Bretton Woods agreement, and that ushered in, the Bretton Woods, which was still a pseudo gold standard. But as you know, Chris, that wasn't much better than what they had, and it was just a refusal to have an honest gold standard. So they came up with this gimmick, which even at that time, just as it was in 1913, there were people who warned about what would happen. But there were people who warned us in 1945 that Bretton Woods couldn't work. And so that was another deal that we had to work on. And, of course, it led to a lot of problems after 1971.
Yes, 1971, the whole system was put on steroids. But, this system, there's been cracks ever since the beginning, starting with the Depression. That was the Fed that fueled that bubble and then burst, and then it burst. But now the bubbles are bigger, stronger, and more violent. They're taking down their own now. Just in 2008, the Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, AIG, it was a slew of them. This was not planned. These are trillion-dollar companies, and they were gone in an instant. So what we're seeing is that this system is falling apart. And in 2008, they were scrambling, didn't know what to do. So what did they do? They flooded with trillions and trillions, unheard of amounts of money they created to try to keep this thing afloat. And we're going to get to what's coming ahead, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, and that was a consequence of the fact that the Bretton Woods didn't last. From 1971, that it broke down then. It ended, but that ushered in an age of massive inflation. And even early on, the 1970s, we had stagflation, depressed economy, rampant inflation. It went on and on. We even had a stock market crash of 1987, which ushered in the nonsense of saying that what is necessary to prevent this. They wouldn't talk about the Fed. They say what we need is a plunge protection team. We need the Fed and Treasury and the government itself to bail out everybody. And of course, that took us all the way up to the point where we had first the NASDAQ bubble collapsing, and then they went back to inflating in the early part of the century and had the housing bubble. And it, too, was predictable, and that is what happened. And you mentioned it in 2008, 2009, the Great Recession occurred, and that meant they ushered in the age of QE. And QE, of course, went, and increased the monetary base and increased the holdings of the Fed by over $3 trillion. And this is all inflationary. And so now we are suffering the consequences. Now they're pretending that, oh, yes, it looks pretty good now. Maybe we can get out of this mess we have that's been created by zero rates of interest rate and pretending there is no inflation. But I think that is coming to an end. Now, the next big step that I think that people have to look at for date-wise was actually the peak of the Dow Jones, and that was, I think, this past January. It's 26,000. Now it's coupled down 3,000. It's up and down. There's violent shifts up and down, but I don't think it's going over 26,000 for a long, long time. And I think this has ushered in this new period of time where there will be corrections. And you mentioned already about how much debt has accumulated. I think the debt in 2009 was around $10 trillion. Now it's $21 trillion. The deficits have exploded. This administration, thank goodness the conservatives are in, because the debt is only going to go up $1 trillion this year. What would the liberals have done? So this continues. I just don't believe it's going to last. I think a lot of people know that, even though there's people who trade stocks and bonds and all the commodities. I think they know it too, but they're still living on the short run. But long term, they know this is not sustainable, because when you look at what's happening around the world, there's more talk now of what's going to replace the dollar. And, the Chinese are talking about it, the Indians are talking about it, Russia's talking about it, and they're starting to trade in gold and trying to get away from the dollar. But also we have seen a great interest in other countries who have stored their gold in the United States are asking for their gold back, because many of them stored their gold here because it was a safer haven and we were more market oriented and we weren't destroyed or bombed during World War I and World War II. But for some reason they've decided, hey, we think we want to take our gold back, and they're coming to find out it. You don't call up the Fed and say, hey, we've had our gold at your place, send us our gold. We find out it's very, very slow in being repatriated. But I think the whole idea that they're thinking about that. And also I think there's a lot of people who are playing on an issue that I have dealt with, and that is the competing currencies, denationalization of money that Hayek has talked about. And so they've worked real hard on trying to come up with a new idea on cryptocurrencies, which is yet to be determined, how successful it will be. But as long as there's options like this, we like to see the competition, which means that they are saying, the dollar should be questioned. How long can we do this? How long can we keep running up these deficits? And they are limited, and I think that's what we're reaching at this period of time where people know it's going to end and something has to be done about it. And more people now are skeptical of the Federal Reserve than they've ever been really throughout our history. And all I can do is think about what it was like to bring this subject up in 1976 when I went to Congress, and now, and there's a lot more support for, hey, open up the books and we don't trust you. There's something wrong. It's serving the crony capitalists in the banking system and globalism, and the least we ought to have is an opening up of the books. But good luck, because it looks like they're going to fight that to the bitter end, and we'll probably see, I'm afraid, further deterioration, maybe total destruction of the dollar, where it will be absolutely necessary for a reform of our monetary system. And I think that's the kind of thing that we should all be thinking about. Chris?
Yes, I'll finish up, Dr. Paul, echoing some of what you said. We are in the biggest bubble of them all that the Fed has created. We have a welfare system that is unsustainable, promises that will never be kept, debt that will never be paid, an empire that they don't know what they're doing around the world. We're finding out where troops are. I mean, we just have to use our eyes and common sense to see that this is totally unsustainable, and new ideas are going to have to replace the old. So if you're watching the show, you're one of the few lucky ones that are exposed to the ideas. Please help us to spread it, tell your friends to subscribe to our show, because this is serious stuff, and the more people that understand, the better it will be to rebuild things after it falls.
This, and that's very true, Chris, and you mentioned even the foreign entanglements in our troops overseas, and we spend a lot of time on this program talking about that. And that is an issue that is very important, because if you look at other empires and great nations, what they tend to do is they get too bold. They think they are the powerhouses. They think they are the moralists of the world, and they want to spread their exceptionalism, which we tend to think that we should be doing. But most of the empires stretch themselves too thinly throughout all history, and then it collapses because they can't control and they can't finance it. And in recent history, that's exactly what happened to the Soviet system. So that plays a big role in it, and that causes the dislike and disdain for us. One of the reasons that people are motivated, other countries are motivated to have alternative currency so they don't have to be dependent on the dollar, nor do they like the idea that we can punish them if they don't do what we tell them, because we'll put on sanctions and deny them access to some of the banking procedures, and that is not good. But domestically, it leads to a lot of turmoil as well. And we have a lot of social discord going on right now. And yet, we hear about how wonderful everything is. The unemployment rate is low and there's no inflation. And yet, the degree of discord is way out of proportion to what the pretense is about what's happening domestically. But we have the contention. I believe most of it comes from the fact that there's so much discrepancy between the rich and the poor. And many have used this analogy that I think is important. They say the three richest people in the world have as much wealth as the lower 50% of the people of the world. And that leads to problems. And this will lead to rebellion against this. And the biggest problem there that I see is they say, well, that's because you guys who believe in free markets, that's why this has happened. That is not the consequence of free market. Free markets that we've experienced in this country created the biggest middle class and the greatest amount of freedom ever before, and the greatest amount of prosperity. There were wealthy people, and there will always be wealthy people, but they should be rewarded for providing jobs and good products for the middle class, and both sides benefit. But that is not the case now. It is there's a lot of social discord, and just look at our university campus and cultural Marxism, and this whole nonsense is just dividing the people. And I believe it originates through economic matters, the principles of liberty, the whole idea of not reigning in empires. This is the reason we get to this point. But the reason we emphasize, and I've talked so much about monetary policy and the Federal Reserve, is none of this can happen because there would not be this gross distortion of the value of money, the gross malinvestment and all the debt accumulation, the undermining of our liberties, the welfare state as well as the warfare state and the empire. It would never happen. Can you imagine what it would be like if every month an American citizen and family would have to write a check to pay some of the bills for just say overseas, just for the militarism overseas. And now, I worked hard in trying to prevent that Iraq war and all those wars in the Middle East. But now it's almost universal that the Iraq war was stupid. It was foolish. It made no sense. And yet what are we doing around the world now? We're doing the same policy, performing the same policy in Syria. And we get involved in Ukraine when we shouldn't be involved. We're involved all across Africa. We have total failure in Libya. So that is all that. But it wouldn't happen if they couldn't deceive the people and borrow in the future, print the money. The penalty goes on the middle class. There's always a payment. The middle class usually has to pay the bills. There's always a delay, sometimes even to another generation. But ultimately, the profiteers, whether it's the profiteers of the welfare here at home or the profiteers from the warfare state and the military-industrial complex, they get the profits and they don't get the punishment. And it will not work out unless people understand how free markets work, why liberty is so much better than totalitarianism, and why you can't have that without sound, honest money. And if the government won't give it to us soon and immediately, then we have to fight for the right to do it on our own and let the people decide what should be the currency. That's the way money originated, and that's the way it's happened over the centuries. But we're in the midst of this crisis. The crisis has already started. I date it from January this year. The stock market is precarious. Our liberties are precarious. The foreign policy is in a precarious state. A crisis is brewing, and we need to understand this if we want to do anything positive in solving those problems. So I want to not close with more fear and concern as much as saying, well, we are making progress. More people now than ever are understanding free market economics. More of young people that I meet are understanding and are desirous of liberties, and more people are starting to understand monetary policy. Ideas have consequences, and I think we're making inroads there, although they have not quite reached Washington, D.C. yet. But eventually, if the ideas are worthy, they will reach all our government officials. But we have to be alert. And it'll become a lot easier later on if we had the right-sized government. It wouldn't be so difficult because the government would only be about 10 or 15% of the size it is today. It would be the people that would be running the country, not the deep state and not the bankers and not the Federal Reserve. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
And that is the Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe while they last. Now, the 1913, the creation of the Fed. Again, read those books I told you about. It's one of the deals where through, interest rates that they pull out of the hat. And really the creation of the Fed put the country in debt automatically. And a lot of people don't understand that. By creating the Fed, we owed someone else for the creation of our money. And basically, once I get that money, I can pay that interest. But to get that money, you have to print it. Therefore, I have to now pay interest on the money you printed to pay the interest on the last money you printed. But how do you ever get out of that? Oh, you don't. You don't unless you go after the Fed. You do a complete, full, down to go out in the tile and find out what's going on. Then you end the Fed and possibly prosecute people because you know that there is more than likely criminal actions happening in the Fed, but they've been so immune to it because they print our money. So, we've been dealing with this, and I think you can see it in the middle class. I think you can see the effects. Basically, if you're not rich, you really see the effects of it every time prices jump. But this is not the only thing that we're facing. When it comes to our economy, we have other things we're facing. Technological growth. We have robots. I seen something today. I think it was today. I don't know. All my days are mashing together anymore. But basically, oil rigs. When OPEC went after oil rigs, I've talked about this before, OPEC drove down oil prices so much that a lot of our offshore fracking, it just wasn't cost effective. And at that same time, you watched oil rigs shut down. Now, that was not spoke about in mainstream media. We're just talking about job loss. A lot of people don't know that oil rigs shut down. Well, eventually they started firing these oil rigs back up, and the problem with that was, well, all those people that were out of a job now, or were out of a job, then got to a point where, oh, oil rigs are back online, but they're still out of a job. Why? Well, they introduced a new robot into the mix. Now, one person can control this robot and basically do what it took about 20 men to do. And the more oil rigs they put these devices on, the less people they need. And our biggest problem, I believe, is not finding other options for people to work. We are constantly finding ways for people not to work, which it sounds good until you study how societies work, how cultures work, and how people react and think. And I'll tell you what, I in about the worst part it was around the end of 2008, the beginning of 2009, is when I first got laid off. But because I made enough money, I was close to topping out at the unemployment level for pay. My mother had been laid off too, and she was topped out, and our difference of unemployment checks was not that big. And so, I got a decent amount of money coming in, not clearly, it was, I want to say, it was around half of what I was making a week, which isn't good when you have bills to pay. And I had recently purchased a vehicle that I end up telling them to come pick up because, well, I'm making half of what I was making. I could keep it, but then there's a lot of other things I would have to give up, and I can find a cheaper vehicle. So I did have to cut back of what I was doing, but then you look at it, I'm getting unemployment. There's absolutely no one hiring. I mean, I went to jobs that I was underqualified for, all the way down to jobs that I was literally told I'm way overqualified for, that even though those jobs were hiring, they said the moment the economy kicks back up a little bit, you'll be out of here. So we're not even going to take the time to hire you. We could never even pay you close to what you've made. They actually told me they couldn't even pay me what I was getting on unemployment. And basically they would not hire me. So now I'm getting income. I cut back on anything that I had large payments on, like vehicle. I worked as a automotive technician, so I had quite a bit of tools, a lot of money in tools. I was probably pressing around 25 grand just in tools. If you want to know why mechanics charge so much for labor, go buy cheap tools and try to do what they do. You're just going to be one mad person and a job not getting done, because when you buy automotive tools, they're pretty, when it comes to the specs. So if you get a 13 millimeter, it's going to be a 13 millimeter. If you buy high grade tools, or you buy low grade tools, it might be off a little bit, plus cheaper metal, and you just rounded a bolt off and snapped your socket or your wrench. So, I cut back all this. I sold a whole bunch of my tools off because I was no longer working in the field. There were expensive tools I had that, unless I get another mechanic job, I don't need this expensive of a tool. Plus I had tool payments. So I sold a lot of that off. Got to a point. I had income coming in. I cut most of my stuff back to a point where now I could drive my, I went out and bought an $800, Chevy truck. It had a little rust on it, but ran good enough for me. I was able to go fishing. Well, being able to go out and do stuff with this money was okay for a while. But there's something in you. Definitely if you're someone that's worked, and I've been working ever since I could, and working hard. I started off working in a dealership, working on cars. I worked in factories. I even worked at a restaurant in between two of my mechanic jobs. Which surprisingly, somehow I made decent money only working 20 hours a week. If I could have got to 40, I don't think I would have went back to doing mechanic work. And that was the only problem, the hours. There's something in you, though, that you want to go out there and work. You almost need that. So we have a lot of hardworking Americans, and when they don't have that work, even if they have money coming in, they're not worried about bills. They can actually go out and, do a little extra, maybe not as much as they could if they work, but like me, I cut back enough that I had that ability. I could go out fishing. I could go out hunting. Go shoot some guns with some friends. But yeah, that was fun, but you almost start losing. If it's all fun and games, you get bored pretty quick. And I just don't think society could handle that. Again, it all sounds good until you do it. And being someone that's been there, had that, money coming in, being able to, hey, we want to go fishing today? Sure, let's go. It didn't help. It's fallacy. And the left is pushing for it hard. You go ask, a working American, where do you think unemployment should be? Well, ideal, it'd be 0, but, if we could get it down to 1%, 2%, well, I'd be happy with that. Go ask Silicon Valley the same thing. You're going to find the answer is, well, it would be nice to get unemployment at about 100%. No one would have to work. We can get robots to do everything. We're, creating this AI. You want to know what that makes you? An animal. Because now you'll have artificial intelligence that's smarter than you. When you look at animals, you're not the strongest animal. You're probably not always the smartest animal. There's animals that have instincts that allow them to be a little smarter. Not all, but you know what I'm talking about. But our ability to be intelligent enough to conquer stronger animals. We tend to look at ourselves at the top of the food chain. Well, that could change your, couple people out in the woods and a bear's chasing you. You might be in a little trouble. Unless, again, your intelligence kicked in and you brought your, Smith & Wesson 500. Again, our intelligence has allowed us to do this. We look at animals as, well, even though they might have some smarts that we don't, they can sniff out things, they got instincts that maybe we don't. We still look at them as, well, they're not as smart as us. They don't have that intelligence that we have. How do you think AI might look at us? Do you think AI is going to see us as a equal or lesser? Right now, it's at its infant stages. But we've already seen it kind of start spiraling out of control. And if it's learning from us with the lack of intelligence that we're now starting to see, if it looks at us just being out of control, do we not become something it needs to tame? Because with our intelligence, and again, we're programming their intelligence and allowing them to progress beyond our intelligence, do we not become something that needs tamed because they need to make sure that they preserve themselves? And believe me, when it becomes intelligent, artificial intelligence, and they learn just like humans have to every other being on this earth, we've tried to be the ones on top to preserve ourselves. That our intelligence allowed us to not all die from being eaten by wolves, bears, and, whatever other animals. We tamed other animals. we've tamed them so many generations that now those animals are 100% domestic animals, like sheep. What was that sheep's name? I forget. Shrek, I think it was, where it got away, escaped, stayed away from people so long that it really couldn't even see anymore. Domesticated. Long, long time ago. Bred and raised, domesticated for so long that now a sheep cannot be a wild animal. You know, you always hear these people, oh, free those animals, free those animals. Do you understand by freeing those animals, you basically ensure their death? There are a lot of animals that are farm animals that you just can't stick out there. Now, there are other animals that you can, that we've domesticated, but then they destroy everything. Maybe, a hog. And again, we've bred certain breeds of those hogs that probably wouldn't last. So I think we need to be very cautious, very, very cautious about where we go from now. Now, I've heard two sides that say, one side told me that they don't believe artificial intelligence will make it to that point. And it goes back to us being the largest empire that this world has ever seen. They believe that before artificial intelligence ever got to that point, that in the process of creating that, we will use it before it gets to that point in a way that actually knocks us back. Hundreds, possibly thousands of years. They said that the world has reset multiple times. Our societies have reset, which causes us to go into a dark age. And they say every time we do that, though, when we come out of that dark age, we tend to go even further. They said that the next time around, our artificial intelligence, robots and stuff might become the next life form. Now, I've also heard that how fast it's growing, and this is from someone else, that they think that society collapsing will be because of that, and it will replace us. If those are our only two choices, I don't know which way I would want to go. Because I can live pretty primitive. I've had primitive survival training. So maybe I would want to go back. If those are my only two options. But that doesn't mean the rest of society can. And would I be able to survive the rest of society with how many people we have on this planet? I actually hope neither of these become true, because it just does not, point to a great society for the future. And I want to play this short clip from We Are Change. You want to see artificial intelligence and how technology is already being used by people against us. This We Are Change clip really points it out pretty well. So we'll get into this real quick.
Hey, yo, what's up, everybody?
Sorry about that. Stupid commercials anymore, and then half the time they don't get paid for them anymore. Someone else does. Google.
Beautiful and amazing human beings to the We Are Change news show that specifically caters to the people who distrust megacorporation, technocrats, banksters, and of course, government. This show is specifically made for you because it's sponsored by you, because it's the only way we can even exist as an independent news organization. Since, obviously the people we rail against censor us, demonetize us, and pretty much screw us out of the bottom line. And the only thing keeping us going is people who go to wearechange.org/donate and make sure we can continue to do this job. Now, moving forward, there's a lot of things, especially now in the news, that make the average person go, what the family-friendly show? Tarnation is going on here. And one of the biggest stories that I'm seeing now that makes me go, what in the tarnation is going on is, of course, what is happening right now in China. Now, of course, I'm not just talking about the economic trade wars that we have been covering very heavily on this YouTube channel, but on China's social credit ratings that actually has the government watching every single one of your moves and then deciding what kind of good citizen you are. Now, this is not just a story from 1984, but it is actually real life. Now, of course, this was sold to the Chinese people by their government, saying that they would only use this against really bad people in society and ostracize them for their bad behavior on everyone else. But also people who question the authority of the state are being caught up in this social credit score and are being targeted for questioning the government. Even this journalist, Li Hu, who's a Chinese journalist that worked on an anti-corruption campaign of the Communist Party of China, who was just listed as untrustworthy into this new Chinese social rating system, who now can't even book a flight, can't buy any property, and his children are not even allowed to go to private school. Now, Liu was actually asked by a court in China to apologize for some of his work, which he did, and the court even deemed it that he wasn't sincere enough in his apology to the Chinese Communist state, and henceforth he is still on this untrustworthy list in this social rating program in China right now, which the list is growing over time because of facial recognition surveillance cameras in China expanding, as well as AI, artificial intelligence companies that are helping participate in this program that judge people if they do community service, buy Chinese-made products, or even if they smoke in a non-smoking area, which would result in you being punished by the state, banning you from flying or getting on trains, slowing down your internet speeds, banning your kids from the best schools, stopping you from getting the best jobs, keeping you out of the best hotels, and having your reputation tarnished as your name would be publicly announced as a bad citizen, which, according to some estimates, already 9 million people are on that list with low scores in this rating system, which still hasn't gone into full effect. And according to the Chinese, by 2020, every citizen would be getting ranked. Of course, this has very serious implications since this is a statist wet dream, and of course the ultimate tool that governments will use to extort power and pressure on its own citizenry from questioning its actions, which slowly could reverberate to a similar U.S. system, which I'm going to be talking about in just a moment. But it's not just questioning corruption that gets you in trouble in China. It's also rolling your eyes, like this reporter who during a government press conference rolled her eyes when a fellow reporter asked a softball question, which automatically made her a meme and go viral, which the Chinese state immediately banned all mentions of, which the Chinese government sent out an urgent notice to all the media out there, telling them that anything posted must be deleted without exceptions, and there must be no mention of this episode. And hooey, if that wasn't enough for the Orwellian nightmare, we have the next article about Chinese factory employees who now have to have brain scanners in order to stop the workers from making mistakes before they happen. Yeah, private companies are now being encouraged to deploy new brain scanners for factory workers that, of course, monitor abnormalities in emotions and thought patterns that would monitor workers' brainwaves and detect spikes in anger, anxiety, or even depression, and then therefore be dealt with management. And I poop you not, this is already in use, but only expanding all throughout China right now, which is pretty much at the tip of the spear when it comes to the technological enslavement of humanity. But don't worry, the United States is not that far behind, which the United States is now proposing that visa applicants to the United States have to hand over 5 years' worth of social media history. In the United Kingdom, right now, the police could download all of the private contents on your phone within minutes without even a warrant, and they proudly have their own Chinese journalist who's on a no-fly list, but his name is actually Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, who now for over 36 days has been gagged and isolated from visitors and any form of communications, cutting off his internet after the United States State Department pressured Ecuador to make this move in the Ecuadorian embassy that he has been in for over 2,703 days, detained there without any charges because of the possibility of extradition to the United States from unknown crimes that he has not yet been officially charged with. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities to this story, and even if you add the fact that private corporation and technocrats like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, as well as Twitter, Google, YouTube, Amazon, and all these other technocrats that literally give over every piece of information about you to the U.S. government, if it's not data mined by the NSA data bulk collection that literally is there just to get as much information on you as they can without even processing it correctly or even going after actual terrorist attacks that are supposed to be happening, totally making that the second primary objective here, while NSA agents were literally caught masturbating to people's private photos that they illegally collected from everyone. Yeah, that actually happened. We have to understand here that there's another form of soft censorship, which is very different from the hard censorship that happens here in China, but is very effective to closing down any dissenting voices, censoring them, isolating them, and also making sure that their message doesn't get out to the larger public, like we have seen the big technocrats do, especially with independent media. And even as Facebook that announced independent media, and even as Facebook that announced just yesterday that, quote, they will be ranking news outlets by their, quote, trustworthiness, which is the same metric that the Chinese are using with their social credit score, whether someone is, quote, trustworthy or not, which now Facebook will use to determine what you see in your newsfeed features. And as we have seen before with Facebook demoting, censoring, isolating content specifically that is contradictory to the status quo or against them or any big government institution or even just being anti-war, those posts, those pages, those individuals like myself and others have been hit dramatically with our reach, if not sometimes just being blatantly, totally censored. So even though this soft censorship is not as blatant and in your face as the Chinese, it is definitely a lot more effective with the same desired effects and without people having to actually face it and see it, and there being less controversy behind it. And it's not just the soft censorship that people here in the United States have to worry about, but also the expanding powers of the executive, which, if you didn't know, can legally assassinate someone without the due process of law and without even a court date, just a personal mandate by the U.S. president. And of course, those programs are expanding, which Donald Trump is even ignoring important deadlines for even just reporting the civilians killed by this specific U.S. drone program, which he did today because the numbers are dramatically going up, which even as of today, we're hearing that 23 civilians were killed in a Syrian airstrike, which is suspected to be by the U.S. coalition, with Donald Trump, of course, expanding U.S. military operations all around the world and dropping a record number of bombs on the Middle East right now as we're speaking, with an estimated 40,000 bombs already dropped by this current U.S. president, which sadly he's facing barely any criticisms from, whether it's the left obsessing about issues that are totally irrelevant or the right adoring him, and the mainstream media just being completely silent on these issues. The few people who do criticize it sadly have to face the brunt of a lot of the censorship efforts that happen against them. To prove my case even more, these are some other important news updates that happened within the last few moments that you should know about. One is a new bipartisan bill that could give U.S. President Donald Trump the power to imprison U.S. citizens in military detention forever under a new AUMF law that is being introduced to the U.S. Senate, which of course would set another dangerous precedent for the executive office here in the United States, which already has an incredible amount of power that is specifically unchecked, especially when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, but should be checked. Continuing on in more what in the tarnation news is going on, we also found out yesterday that the United States quietly released Afghanistan's biggest drug kingpin from prison. One of the biggest U.S. allies, Saudi Arabia, had to apologize after an image came on during a wrestling WWE match in their country of a woman dressed in scantily clad clothing, which of course they had to publicly apologize for. Meanwhile, a U.S. judge ordered Iran to pay $6 billion to the victims of 9/11, even though declassified U.S. government documents say Saudi Arabia played a major role in the 9/11 attacks, with 15 of the 19 hijackers coming in from there. And I could keep rambling on about Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States' involvement with 9/11, but that's a whole other topic. UN's nuclear agency also ruled that there was no credible indications of Iran's nuclear activity being fired up after 2009, which directly contradicts Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, that, of course, the Europeans are casting doubt on ever since, of course, his major push for the United States' involvement with an Israel-Iranian war. At the same time, Israel is testing their anti-missile systems in Alaska for some reason. Israel also announced that they would retaliate and act forcefully against Russia if they give them the S-300 anti-aircraft missile defense systems to Syria, which, of course, they're planning on still doing. And in some not-so-bad news, WWE star Kane is set to actually win the Republican nomination in Tennessee for mayor, which I think is actually great news because I actually met Kane and they actually knew about We Are Kane's. I, of course, knew about him. He was at some libertarian convention. Ron Paul was there, and he's pretty cool. So, yes, that is the news for today, May 2nd, 2018. I hope you guys appreciated this program. This Saturday, actually, we lose our Dash sponsorship, which ends this Saturday. And I kind of wanted to ask you guys, we're looking for more sponsorships. We're thinking about possibly doing another Dash proposal, asking them for sponsorship, or maybe a Pivot sponsorship, or maybe even just going with third-party advertisers. What do you guys think is the right way for us to independently sustain this media operation, since it's been extremely difficult with our viewerships being suppressed and also being completely demonetized by YouTube? Your donations, of course, are great and are sustaining us, but with this continued trend, it will be virtually impossible just to survive off donations. So I'm asking you guys, where should we go next? What cryptocurrency should we work with? Should we work with third-party advertisers? How else should we finance this independent media operation? I would love to hear your feedback, which, of course, I'm going to be answering and following back very closely here on this YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much for being a part of Real Independent Media, because if it wasn't for you watching and sharing and being here with us, I wouldn't be here. That's why I love you guys. Thank you again so much for watching. Stay tuned for more.
And if you ask me, I think we need a new ad format. That's something like AdSense, which is Google's ad format. I think that combined with another video platform could put YouTube out. There's different ways. I wish I had the money dealing with what I'm dealing with right now. I definitely don't have any money to start something up like that. Nor do I have the technological know-how to get that in depth in it. But I think that a new ad format that also allows, let's say we do get a company that they just don't want to be involved in guns at all. They don't want advertised on a gun channel. They just even if they're not anti-gun, they just don't want to be involved, therefore they won't have to be in the debate. Have some type of ad format that goes, hey, I don't want to be involved in firearms videos. I don't want to be involved in abortion videos. I don't want to be involved in anything that speaks about this or that. Something that allows the advertiser to go a little bit farther in depth instead of just joining the recommended, or, you know, how YouTube does it. They'll just be like, oh, you know, this person, you shouldn't, we're not even going to allow them to have your ads on it because they're just so bad. They're bad people. Just, you don't want your ads on it. Well, how about you let me make the choice of what channels I allow my ads to play? If I put an ad for anything on YouTube right now, and I wanted my ad to play before the We Are Change clip, I couldn't do it through YouTube. What I would have to do is I would have to get a hold of Luke and say, hey, you know, I'll sponsor a video. And that would allow me to, you know, they could just mash that ad into their video. But what's even worse is that they demonetize We Are Change. There were just multiple ads that played on that clip. They're still playing the ads. They're just saying he's not good enough to get any of the profit from it. That should be illegal. I believe in some, you know, way or form they are. If you say, oh, you know, for years and years you could be monetized, but now because we feel some type of way, well, we're going to still put ads on your videos, except you're not going to get paid for them anymore. Sounds like Google and YouTube and Alphabet Inc. broke their contract with Luke. To me, it seems like Luke hasn't done anything that he hasn't been doing for years that he was allowed to make money on until, because, well, you know, he's not on our political side, and now we're dividing the country so polar opposites, and we're going to go with the left, and you're completely towards the right, even though he went after the right. Per se, we're probably fine with that, but the moment, now you don't go after the right, you go after the left. Well, no, he goes after corruption in multiple forms and sides. And if you think it's just left or right, that's an ignorance that you have from living in your little fallacy over there in, you know, California, New York, and, you know, your little cocoons that you have built. So I think that really, and I'm not talking about breaking up Alphabet Inc. or Google or none of that. No. I think people just, we need to find those alternative formats and just completely exit. And for the most part, I've exited Google for searching things. I still go to YouTube to watch clips from We Are Changing multiple sources because, well, they're all right there. There is DTube out there, but the problem is we've been so ingrained that, it's YouTube, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Instagram, Snapchat. And until other things become mainstream, which I think it's going to have to, it's really going to have to start with a strong, liberty-minded youth. And they're going to have to do it in a very intelligent way. And I think it would be almost, it would be like you remember all the cat videos. Then it became a thing to start going, hey, watch this cat, and the frame picture would be a cat, a little cute kitty or something. But then you'd hit play and it would just be, someone talking. What I think, like with DTube and stuff, you almost, with the way society is, you would almost have to have like the newest version of Jackass or, one of these other, crazy, trendy things and have that posted there. You would have to draw people in to it that don't normally go your ideological or political or share any of the viewpoints that you may have. Because that's what would bring down Google and YouTube and Facebook, is to use those alternative formats and cater to the people that you disagree with. Cater to the masses. And I think that's even what, TV's been missing for a while, other than you had Last Man Standing, which they canceled, which they may bring back now because of Roseanne. But when Roseanne came back, what happened? People flocked to it. Why? Because people are missing a lot of what used to be. The shows now have become a very leftist-leaning and pushing type of, way. Where, when I grew up, you'd have Roseanne. You would have, not Ellen's talk show, but her show. You had a mix of left leaning and right leaning. You had Home Improvement. You had Boy Meets World. What our kids shows might have been out then. I couldn't name all of them. I'm just pulling ones that are popping in my head. But you had a mix of conservative viewpoints with liberal viewpoints, and I grew up hearing both sides. I would hear, those, feminist views. I would hear those, Roseanne was one that broke, some of that, having a gay person in the show. Now it's looked at as the, right leaning. That's how far the left has gone, that they look at Roseanne. That still has gay character and, all that on it now, and she has a grandchild that, even though he feels like a boy, he likes to dress like a girl. That's the left-leaning stuff, and they're going, oh, she's so, right-leaning with the Trump stuff, and actually she's more of a communist. She's a self-proclaimed, like, communist or socialist. I can't remember right offhand. But she shares a different viewpoint than what the left is, sharing right now, because she wasn't a Bernie Sanders supporter. She wasn't a Hillary Clinton supporter. She wasn't a Jill Stein supporter. She supported Trump because of independent thought. She pondered in her head what she believed the right choice would be. Doesn't mean it is the right choice, but I don't think if you just go with who they gave you for choices, there was any right choice. But she went with her gut. She didn't jump on bandwagons. And what the people are starting to see is like, our shows they're doing okay. They're still holding their own. They got rid of Last Man Standing, which was, they even stuck it on a Friday, hoping it would just die off there on a Friday, and it's still, it won awards for being on Friday. It was hitting records because, well, Fridays, a lot of people go out, but people were sticking home to watch Last Man Standing. And now with the Roseanne and, being a pro-Trump, and that brought a lot of people in. And they're going, that's part of the reason why they're talking about bringing Last Man Standing back. And other more middle ground, conservative, even libertarian leaning shows. Because they've been pushing this pro-leftist view for so long that they were completely blinded that, hey, you still have half of the country that doesn't believe these views. And you can show it and show it and show it, doesn't mean they're going to start believing it all of a sudden. Oh, but then, if we even slightly cater to them, making, which she in real life voted for Trump, but making the character a Trump supporter. Just by doing that little bit. There's still so much liberal push in it, but they made that little part. And that was enough to bring conservatives. You had liberal viewpoints that were mocked on. They would mock the daughter's boyfriend, husband, on Last Man Standing, but they still had, some liberal leaning views that were expressed not only by that person, but other family members, but mainly conservative views. But it worked. And I think that's where mainstream media is just shooting itself in the foot, is when you have ABC go, well, we're going to get rid of this because we kind of leftists, we try to kill it off, but that didn't work. But, we can just go, hey, you know what? We're stopping it. Keep shooting yourself in the foot. Keep doing it. Makes it easier on the rest of us. Now, I'm going to get into this clip. It's a little bit of a long clip, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. Or I'm going to try not to play the whole thing. It matters. Yeah, look at my clock here. Okay, I'm not going to play this whole thing, but let me cue it up here. Okay, this is about the recent talk about, this peace summit that Korea had between the North and South, and, both leaders stepped over the line, and, it's going to be a new era. I have one here from Stefan Molyneux, and this one's titled "The Truth About the North and South Korea Peace Summit," and he has guest Michael Malice on. So let's go ahead and get into part of this, and then I am going to stop this early because we are a little bit further in the broadcast than I originally thought. So let's go ahead and get into this real quick, and we'll cover, the whole Korea Peace Summit and where the America stands in this whole deal.
Hope you're doing well. We're here with a good friend, Michael Malice. He's a writer, television commentator, the author of many books, including this Act 1, Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong-il, and he's the host of You're Welcome. Don't even think of putting an apostrophe in there, with Michael Malice on Compound Media. The website is Michael Malice. TheBond.com and CompoundMedia.com. I guess the only one that isn't named as if he was a Bond villain. And thanks so much for your time today. We're going to talk all things North Korea, because it seems like the element of doom has risen slightly from the chest of humanity low these last few days. But as you all want to do, let's not get our hopes up too high.
Right.
Where do you see things sitting at the moment?
I'm always hopeful when there's any even visuals of peace. You know, the images that you saw, we all saw at the DMZ, were certainly heartening. Were certainly the first, if peace and some kind of dismantling of this regime would happen, this is kind of what it would look like. That said, you know what, I tell everyone, all my friends who are Trump fans, remember when Hillary Clinton tweeted out, "Happy birthday to this future president"? We haven't had one camp closed down. We haven't had one person freed. We haven't had one missile taken apart. So, yes, there's absolutely reason for optimism, and this is wonderful, but the idea that Trump should get the Peace Prize, or either the Korean leader should get this Peace Prize, let's take a deep breath, because remember what happened with Arafat in the 90s, of course.
And it's like I took my ball off the moment and everything had changed. It's like, we're going to nuke Guam. I'm going to kill my family members. It's like, now I'm a best friend. Everything's going to be wonderful. We're brothers. And it's like, I think I dated someone like that in my early 20s, and it was quite a roller coaster, let me tell you. So what changed? I mean, this isolationist strategy, this negotiation, Trump saying, be my friend. I mean, like, what switch may have flipped that even gives us the possibility of optimism here?
Right. So what we know that hasn't switched is this idea that Kim Jong-il woke up maybe like Ebenezer Scrooge and had been visited by the ghosts of Korea past, Korea future.
That would be a long night. Let me put it to you that way. One ghost a minute, that's infinity.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, wait a minute, what have I been doing? Genocide is wrong. I should be friends with people. No, we know that didn't happen. And we know that this, dictator, he recently killed his own brother. He killed his uncle when he first stepped foot into power. And to this day, maintains using food as a mechanism of social control. What we don't know is what happened behind the scenes, and there's several possible scenarios. First of all, what is without dispute is that President Trump made this a huge priority internationally, far more than Obama or even President Bush did. It was one of the first things he was talking about. I believe the Chinese president was the first one who visited President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. They were explicitly talking about North Korea. He was talking about with President Abe, with the South Korean President Moon. And the State of the Union, I got into it a little bit with Ann Coulter on Twitter, because a lot of the State of the Union was about North Korea, but we had that refugee who had the crutch, waving it from the stands. So he clearly sees this as an opportunity for him to use his power as the President of the United States to affect change and make the world a better place. At the same time, he has to deal behind the scenes with China and Japan and South Korea. And the point I made, which I know you agree with completely, is if we're using some kind of backdoors diplomacy to force him to do what he doesn't want to do through machinations, which I'm perfectly fine with. I have no problem with someone putting bullet in this guy. If publicly he has to be a happy-go-lucky, warrior of peace and save face, fine. As long as he does the right thing, I don't care if he tries to pretend that he's this big humanitarian.
No, if people have to save face in order to save lives, that's not really that much of a juggle. So that seemed to be a long way of saying what happened. We don't know really. Yeah. Because, it seemed to just pop out of nowhere. This is something that, people who are 70 years old were born when this war started. This has been going on forever. This is like the length of the Soviet Empire, almost. This is a very big, long, intractable conflict, which has, I think, in many ways, just been getting worse as the two countries have divided in terms of the directions, the freedoms, the economic productivity that's been going on. And, of course, the longer a country rests in this kind of stew of trauma, the more brutalized the population, the harder it is to recover. So the length of this has been enormous. There has been, of course, as you know, fits and starts of progress in the past. There was under Bush, it went further back. It's sort of like every time they get the PLO to shake hands with somebody in Israel, yes, it's like, woo, it's all solved. And then it kind of all falls apart. So do you think it's as different from false starts in the past, and why?
It's different, and here's certain things that we know that are demonstrably different. First of all, the fact that Kim Jong-un is willing to leave the country and meet on foreign soil is very, very different. Because Kim Jong-il, and I talk about this in my book, Dear Reader, Kim Jong-il boasted, he said, why do I need to leave North Korea? Everyone comes here. The Chinese went there, Japanese went there, South Korean president went there, President Clinton went there, President Carter went there, in the 90s.
to try to negotiate a deal. So, in a sense, this is like the mafia, where the guy sits at the big table and everyone comes to his table, shake his hand. He's not the one standing up. So the fact that he's willing to leave the country is a major change. The fact that his sister is taking prominence and his wife are taking prominence in North Korean propaganda is also a major change, because this is a humanization. So in the past, Kim Jong-il, was regarded as this kind of deity figure. It was not known that he had, any kind of family or children. He wasn't thought of in that way. The metaphor I always use is like we think of Uncle Sam. We don't think of him as having a house and kids. He's just kind of floating around doing what's right for the nation. So this is a big step forward in terms of not regarding him as some kind of superhuman deity. So this is a step back for him as well. And the fact that publicly they are dropping all sorts of demands that they've had for decades, which demands, frankly, I don't blame them for having. The idea of let's get American troops off South Korean soil, well, I would certainly have that as a precondition for disarmament. I know all of the listeners, with regards to the Second Amendment, the idea that, well, I'm just going to hand over my guns and trust the U.S. federal government to protect me, that's not something that they would agree with. So why would they expect Kim Jong-un, who has a much worse relationship with Washington than anyone here, why would they expect him to think any differently?
Oh, the whole disarmament plea has nothing left in the chamber. I mean, after you look at people like Saddam Hussein, after you look at the Libyan president, after you look at what they're trying to do with Bashar al-Assad, the idea is like, disarm and everything will be fine. Right. Nobody believes that anymore. In fact, it's a suicide mission to disarm internationally in the face of U.S. Aggression and manipulation. So I think that is no longer believable.
Can I make 1.7? I was very delighted. So when I first started working in this space, the argument out there always was, oh, the North Koreans are crazy. We don't know what they're going to do. They're going to blow up everyone. And now, even on the right, in the 90s, the idea that Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden could have goals and are kind of rational actors in their own depravity, this would be heresy. Because the idea is if you're trying to understand how they think, you're saying that they're telling the truth, and you're siding with them. Now, increasingly on the right, I'm delighted to find people, I was on Breitbart over last week, where people are like, wait a minute, why would he disarm? Look what happened in Syria. Look what Gaddafi was not just killed, he was sodomized to death. Why would he do this? So the fact that the U.S. right wing is increasingly understanding that they're acting in accordance with their own interest and analyzing things from that perspective is also a huge step forward in terms of fighting propaganda, because it's a lot easier to say this person's a crazy person who's about to nuke Seoul, as opposed to, okay, this is an evil villain, and how do we manipulate him to get the result we want?
Well, I think you have had a lot to do with that in terms of pointing out repeatedly that evil is different from crazy. People love to conflate evil with crazy. Like, whenever there's a terrorist attack in Europe or other places, they say, oh, it's a mental health issue. And it's like, well, there are lots of people who are crazy. They're not mowing down people in trucks or stabbing people to death in nightclubs. But this idea that there's evil that is not insane is really, really important, because if you think your opponent is crazy, it actually gives you license to be crazy. They're so unpredictable, they're so random that anything we do is going to be saner. It is actually a way of uncorking your own crazy rather than acting in a rational context.
And let me remember very clearly, during the 90s, the argument was, the 2000s, the argument was, not only does Saddam have WMDs, he's about to launch them imminently. And these two sentiments were regarded as synonymous. And they're not synonymous whatsoever. There are many, many countries around the world who have WMDs, other than apparently, supposedly Assad. None of them are launching them. So, and both Pakistan and India have nukes pointed at each other. They've had for quite a while. They're not launching them. So the idea that these two things, that, oh, this person has, this person's crazy and is going to attack imminently, I think that's fallen away from the consciousness, other than with people like Bill Kristol and his ilk.
Well, and of course, Americans, particularly on the right, would never accept the argument, well, you have a gun, obviously you're going to shoot someone. The only reason you'd have a gun is to just go and shoot someone randomly. They would say, no, the gun is to make sure that I don't get aggressed against. And given the U.S. history, particularly post-Second World War, it's not a crazy fear to think that you need some sort of deterrence against U.S. imperialism.
And it's also kind of funny because North Korea has also explicitly said that they're going to attack Guam. They said they're going to nuke us, and enough people are like, all right, we know this is an empty threat. And that is kind of a big deal, because not that long ago, I'm sure you remember, where the idea of any country would threaten the U.S., immediately, we have to strike. I mean, they said it. And now there's much more grain of salt, like, you know what? Let's look at war as a last resort as opposed to our first priority, because, not only is war horrible for the victim, it's also the costs for us are going to be enormous as well, both in terms of people lost, cost of money, and international relations.
Right. Here's another possibility to sort of bat this around. Let me know what you think, Mike. The U.S. has, I don't know how to put this as nicely as possible. Okay, I won't. The U.S. has a long history of working with dictatorships that are absolutely brutal to their own population.
Yes.
And so the idea that the U.S. is some sort of big moral force is pretty wild to me. I mean, they're selling hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weaponry to a crazy theocratic dictatorship like Saudi Arabia, where, what is it, some guy got 1,000 lashes for even remotely suggesting that women should be allowed to drive. Now women are allowed to drive. I mean, and you get people thrown in jail for skeptical atheist blogs, and I mean, just crazy, crazy stuff. Complete dictatorship. And China, of course, is brutal towards its own population in many ways. And the U.S. is like, yeah, we'd love to work with you. Let's sit down and hammer out a trade deal for mutual benefit. And so I guess the argument could be floating towards Kim Jong-un is that, not so explicit. You can be evil, but don't be evil plus random. Be predictable evil, and the U.S. will be more than happy to work with you. And so maybe this is just a different strategy that he may be getting, or even explicitly be getting from other dictatorial government leaders around the world, saying, they'll work with you, just, maybe dial back the Guam thing a bit.
And you get to look like the good guy. On the public stage. And let me just back up what you said. One of the jokes that's in my book is, Kim Jong-il says after World War II, the U.S. imperialists, that's us, installed an evil strongman in Syngman Rhee. But in the North, Kim Il-sung, the great leader, was, voted in through a democratic process. But South Korea was a dictatorship for quite a long time. In the late 70s or early 80s, there was even a kind of a Tiananmen Square uprising that was put down with college students, that was put down with great brutality. And the recent President Park, South Korea's first female president, who was recently sentenced to jail, she's their version of Hillary Clinton. Her father was a brutal dictator. I mean, there are many crazy things. The first lady was assassinated at one point. The president of South Korea was assassinated another time by the head of the South Korean CIA. So it was very brutal. And North Korea used this very effectively in their propaganda. And they point out, look, how are you criticizing us when this guy is simply a puppet of the U.S. imperialists? And there was a lot of truth to that. After Afghanistan, I mean, certainly we're not just going to, hey, let's have a big vote and put in whoever we want. And, we came in here, did a lot of war, and whatever the vote results in, we're going to be fine with it. That's not how it worked out.
And I think because, as you've pointed out, is that Kim Jong-un is different from his father. He loves the West. He appreciates technology. He's, of course, I assume, got internet access, the only guy. Yes. And he's traveled. He was educated outside of North Korea and so on. And so it's pretty hard to miss the difference between where you visited and the country that you have. If there's a way, and I think this is sort of the fantasy of all dictators, which is to say, if there's a way for me to get from where I am to, I don't know, Singapore, maybe Hong Kong in terms of economic growth, but without being deposed, without being slaughtered, without losing power, that's kind of tempting. And if there's a way to give him that yellow brick road towards some liberalization of the economy, Glasnost style under Gorbachev and so on, if there's a way to give him that path that he can begin to liberalize without feeling, well, the next thing you do is he's going to get sodomized, as you pointed out, like Gaddafi with bayonets up his butt. That seems like something that, okay, you get more money, you get more power, you get more prestige, you get more influence in the world stage. There's got to be a way. Yeah, he's evil for sure. Unadulterated, Pillsbury Doughboy filled with Satan juice kind of evil. But if there's a path to lure him with the bright lights of the shining city of more free markets, man, I mean, there's a lot to be said for that in terms of transitioning out of dictatorship.
Oh, I agree with you, but this is where the economic argument, of course, comes in, which is it's very, very hard to have economic dictatorship and not social dictatorship, because once those people have access to information and they're looking at South Korea or China and they don't have food, it's a lot harder to be like, wait, why are we keeping you in power again? And at the same time, there's so much blood on the hands of these leaders, specifically the North Korean leaders, that there are many people who are like, my father starved because of you for no reason. And the idea that I'm just going to sit here and shake your hand, I mean, all it's going to take is one or two nuts or even within his inner circle, when these things start falling apart. So the thing is, it becomes this torrent once they lose their hold on the gun. It's kind of like what's that metaphor about grabbing a tiger by the tail? The problem is you don't want to let go. That's when it gets tricky. And that's the situation. And even Gorbachev's another example. He lost his hold on power. He had a happy ending, but there was a coup attempt on him at a certain point. So I agree with you completely. If there could be liberalization and they become a Singapore model, I'd be perfectly fine with that. But once you take away the control of the population and the brutality, you're also taking away a large element of their fear. And if they don't fear you, someone is going to get the right idea and be like, wait a minute, this guy is Ceausescu, and he should be taken out. And all of his forces with him.
But China's got some. I know that the Chinese economic growth is a lot of, we built a bridge to nowhere, we built a shining city in a mine just to consume resources. But they're getting, north of 7% economic growth, and they have a fairly authoritarian system. So it may be transitioning more towards that kind of stuff where you're liberalizing the free market, but still there's a lot of social control.
Here's the difference between North Korea and China, because that's a very, very good question. So with China, when they liberalized, I think it was in the 70s, Mao's honor and his status in the country was diminished. There was very much, in many ways, a repudiation of Mao. Even though he's still regarded as the father, he's not drawn with sunlight coming out from his body and everyone looking at him in awe, as was the law when he was in charge. Kim Jong-un is a direct descendant of the great leader Kim Il-sung. This isn't someone, like Mike Pence or, Pelosi from differing parties. The whole point of his having a legal right to be the leader of North Korea is he has the Mount Paektu bloodline, that he's a direct, and only someone of the Mount Paektu bloodline can be the leader. That's why he had to have his brother killed so that there wouldn't be a replacement for him. So if that family is diminished in its regard for how good they are and how powerful and wonderful they are, as Mao was, that is a huge blow to his legitimacy towards authority, which is the big difference between China, because it was not hereditary. So there was room for the Chinese to kind of throw Mao under the bus. Even if he wanted to, I suppose, throw Kim Il-sung under the bus, he has his haircut specifically to look like his grandfather and to harken back to those days. He still wears those suits just like his grandfather did. So that would really be a tough nut for him to swallow.
Yeah, it always comes down to me to the sort of question, this is just maybe obviously not a complete analogy, but someone who's been sent to jail for 20 years on manufactured evidence and so on, and then they're set free, and then, do they then say, well, I'm going to go and find everyone who framed me and I'm going to go and kill them, or it's just like, I'm free, let me move on with my life, let me go and have the kind of glories of freedom that I never anticipated to take in my life, and whether or not there may be a consciousness around that, because that would be, I don't know what the level of vengeance is appropriate in these kinds of situations, but if there is liberalization, might there not be just such gratitude for the breaths of freedom coming down that the idea of insurrection and blowback might diminish?
One of my friends, when he was reading my book, made a point that I didn't realize I'd made, which is North Korea is such a perfect prison, it's even a prison for the leaders. So even the people at the very top are bound by the dictates of this dictatorship. I agree with you that for most people, I was certainly one of them, it's like, let's just free these people. I don't, this is a one guy. However, given that there were 1 to 2 million people who starved in North Korea during the 90s, the idea that there would be a huge percentage of the population who watched their children starve, who watched their fathers starve, who watched family members starve, and who were hungry for a couple of decades after that, that there wouldn't be enough of them that are saying, no, I'm Old Testament. I'm not doing this New Testament forgiveness. Something has to be done. Or in another sense, Stefan, that internationally the UN wouldn't have some kind of like Slobodan Milosevic, we'd have to take care of this person. Those are, I don't know how you would work around those two things.
Yeah, it's a tough question, especially if they don't have the turn the other cheek Christian tradition of forgiveness and, love the sin or hate the sin stuff without that mindset.
It's quite the opposite. The great leader Kim Il-sung said class enemies have to be exterminated 3 generations. And this is a long-standing thing in Asia with kind of like family punishment. So it's very much, if the scale is balanced towards punishment and not towards forgiveness, to the point where you're punishing innocent people. So this is not part of their psychology or their culture.
And I saw something that really haunted me. I think it was on Twitter. And it was line drawings of the concentration camps and the guards.
Yes.
And the amount, there were simple line drawings, but the amount of horror that was poured into these like rat-like guards with the sadistic faces and the broken and shattered and starved people lying on benches being beaten and attacked and assaulted. It was like, gulags come to life with Solzhenitsyn's pen of record. And that is not an argument, you understand? I'm just sort of saying the emotions that evoked in me around just what is going on there and how much horror has been force-fed into the very bone marrow of the people. I can certainly see the standing on the volcano perspective.
And also, in the way that Hayek said that in politics, the worst rise to the top, I genuinely think that if you're going to be a prison guard in charge of a concentration camp, it's going to be selected for people who are predisposed towards sadism and predisposed to inhumanity. I don't think an average person, no matter how much he's brainwashed, is going to feel comfortable watching children starving and beating children relentlessly. I don't think that really is part of the average human psyche. It takes a special kind of person to watch amputations and rape and just think, this is great. When's it my turn?
Well, and as you point out, food as a weapon has a long history under communism, of course. And
yes.
You were talking about, and I thought your comments about the sort of social marking or the social scoring that is occurring in China had its predecessor in North Korea, where they graded people according to their fitness as proletariat role models, and then the people who had any taint of bourgeois or capitalist or entrepreneurship, they were sent far away from the docks, far away from the sources of food, but get food last. And this idea that you will starve to death, like it's not, there are concentration camps in the entire open-air prison of the country, and that you would make sure these people got the food the last, if at all, and that, of course, would tend to be your most entrepreneurial and intelligent, and anybody who's worked in the free market knows that you need to have empathy for your customers if you're going to serve their needs, and it's almost like breeding out any capacity for empathy and sensitivity in the population and making sure that the most cruel get the most food.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, we do like the idea that it's the ones who are cynical toward the government who are the ones who were the first ones to say, I'm going to do what it takes to survive. Whereas those who are loyal to the regime, who believed that the leader is going to send food, just you wait, they were the first ones. And many refugees talk about this. Those are the ones who starved that family member who's like, you guys are just worrying prematurely. This will all blow over. The dear leader has us in his hearts. You just have to have a little bit more faith. And those are the ones who ended up first as corpses. So it's depraved in every direction you look. I mean, we often talk in economics in terms of market irregularities and things like that about like rent control. But when you apply it to human beings and genocide, what comes out of it is this is also it's traumatic. And this is also the question for me, being from the Soviet Union, is like, are Russians like this because the government made them like this? Or was the government there because the Russians were predisposed to this kind of psychology? It's a chicken and egg situation. The one positive thing I can say is I've met many refugees, and they're the most vapid, banal young people you ever hope to meet, which is really wonderful, because you want them to be as boring and normal as everybody else. You don't want them to be shattered birds with shattered wings. You want to know if this country's liberated, they're going to be listening to crappy music and watching crappy television, but they'll be normal and they'll be human. And that is, for me, the important thing to keep in mind.
Where do you think things stand, Michael, with regards, and we talked about this last time, but I wanted to circle back on this. The big concern, of course, with American foreign policy is it starts with words and it ends with swords. Where do you think any potential for military involvement? I mean, direct involvement seems very hard to imagine, but they always do this subterranean stuff, this funding this and helping that and giving weaponry to so-and-so. Do you think that there is going to be any escalation of military involvement directly or regarding North Korea?
No, I don't think at all. And I think President Trump has been working very closely with China, and China has been working very closely with North Korea and has been taking them to heel to some extent. And that's certainly if that were the case, this is what that outcome would look like. And from the beginning, Trump and Tillerson and Bannon and several others in the administration says there's no way we're hitting these people. It would be absolutely bonkers. the consequences. So that was never really on the table. Just him being garrulous certainly has had some positive effect, but the idea that this is going to be another Iraq or Afghanistan, I can't even imagine that happening.
There's an odd kind of combination, which is one of the reasons why I'm very enthusiastic about the talks that you give on this, Michael. There's an odd power behind calling someone evil but not crazy. And I'm sort of reminded of what happened under Reagan, where Reagan referred directly to the Soviet Union as an evil empire. Now, with Hussein, it was like, well, he's evil and crazy. And there is something that is powerful around changing the course of a culture. It's a weird word to use, respect. If you give respect to evil, to say, listen, you're evil, but you know what you're doing. You're evil, but you're not crazy. And that does seem to, like, when I remember when Reagan referred to the Soviet Union as an evil empire, that was a very powerful moment and a very powerful clarity. And it really bothers me the degree to which, since Christianity since religion as a whole has become less of a social force in the West, we've lost the ability to call evil by its proper name, which is, it's cunning, it's dangerous, and it has power, and it has goals, and it has motives, and it's not crazy. And there's something about clearly identifying that evil that does seem to have an impact in changing the course of what is going on. I'm reminded back to Chamberlain, even in the 1930s, with his absolute inability to see National Socialism and Hitler for what they were doing, even after being clearly told, in Mein Kampf and other writings, what was planned. This inability to see and describe and accurately comprehend evil seems to give it a kind of power and longevity that a direct enunciation of the principles seems to push back against.
And I'll give you another example that's just happening today, which is, you don't remember, but I'm sure many people are aware of Walter Duranty in the New York Times covering for Stalin's genocide and the depravity that was going on.
Getting a Pulitzer.
And he won the
Which
Pulitzer.
has yet to be returned.
And so many people in the West were like, oh, these show trials are nothing, everything's fine, what are you talking about? This is a great social experiment, so on and so forth. And just today, I believe it was the New York Times celebrating Karl Marx's 200th birthday. And I mean, at what point, how many bodies do you need to say, oh, this isn't like, the flat tax versus the sales tax versus the progressive tax. This is when you're killing millions of people. If that's not evil, I don't know what is. So one of the big arguments I have with my conservative friends is they think that the corporate press, sometimes gets it wrong. And they're mistaken. And I do that, that's true. We all make mistakes. But my view is sometimes they are doing this with full knowledge and intentionality. And when you look at them in that respect, it takes on a whole, like you said, a whole different set of power and a whole different perspective.
I just tell you, just person to person, particularly because your history with Russia and so on, it is and remains fundamentally incomprehensible to me how communism has escaped even more opprobrium than Nazism. The death count is higher, the penetration is deeper, the rule of the world is wider, and the amount of suffering that has been created, although the Nazis are pretty damn close second, is greater. And yet, I remember even back in my early 20s when I was on the debate team, I would come across people with their Che Guevara T-shirts. I remember one of the guys I was debating with had a little pin of Karl Marx, and even at that time, maybe it's my family history or whatever, but even at that time, Michael, I'm like, how is this? I would say to people, like, do you know what this represents? Do you understand what this represents? Even if you don't care about the horrifying ideology of unlimited state power, control, and brutality, can you not see the bodies? They pile so high, they're like a mountain of horror. How is it possible? You get 40% of American anthropologists are self-described Marxists. It's astounding.
And there's the very famous, well, not very famous, in 1936, Ayn Rand was shopping around her book, We the Living, having just escaped the Soviet Union and seeing it firsthand. And she was told by New York City editors that the writer just doesn't understand communism. So I think this comes down to a function of psychology. When you're at a certain level of education, a certain level of status, you don't have to have access to facts because you have been initiated into the mysteries of life, and everyone else is just, babbling morons, and you know how it is, and it's simple as that. The human mind is very good at dismissing facts it doesn't want to deal with, and maintaining its hold on ideology. And frankly, I think Thomas Sowell talks about this as well. The smarter you are, the easier it is to get wrapped up within your own ideology and become a self-serving echo chamber because you're that much more confident in your own brilliance.
And I'm going to stop it right there, one, because we're getting towards the end of the broadcast here, two, because I really think that is somewhere that we need to leave it. Because I've always been someone that I constantly look at the man in the mirror. I'm constantly questioning what I believe. Because I believe without that, if I don't try to listen to the other side, I can't truly have an understanding for my own belief if I'm not willing to listen to the other side. And the thing is, with the left, there's a lot of stuff I agree with the left on. Because a lot of their anger or their what they are upset about, there's legitimate concern there. If you're not the black person, you can't go, well, there's no racism or prejudice. No, there really is, because a lot of cultural difference. You know, if you've been raised a suburban, the only black family you seen was the one or two black families that live on your road, and they dress all conservative and all that. When you see the black guy in the baggy jeans, a t-shirt with his, hat kind of on crooked. A lot of times those people look at that and just automatically think criminal thug, Same with a lot of times in the white community. And I don't think blacks understand this sometimes too, because a lot of times you'll look at someone that's very rough around the edges, that's white, that, drives a beat up truck, and you go, he looks like, one of those white trash meth head, people. Well, that's his work truck. He's not going to drive a brand new truck because he actually uses the hell out of his truck. He's dirty because he just got off of work. And probably if you follow him home, he has a nice car. After he gets out of the shower, he don't look too bad. There's that misconception. And I think a lot of that goes back to our history and how people used to carry themselves and conduct themselves. Culture has changed and society has changed so much that you will see professional people that run, multi-million-dollar companies, that they might have started it, but when they're out in public, when they're not, working, they might not look like a business owner. It used to be if you were a business owner, you went everywhere in a, dressed pretty dapper. You looked professional all the time if you left the house. And that's not the way it is anymore. I mean, it wasn't 100% that way before, but it was a good majority of it. And now it's cool that you can be rich and wear jeans and a t-shirt, and even to work. I've known owners of companies that there was one that, he wore a tie-dye Grateful Dead shirt with, jeans and some loafers to work. Owned a company, multi-million-dollar company. He was a deadhead. You would never look at that guy and be like, oh yeah, he's a multi-millionaire. Absolutely not. But he was. So, there is prejudice. It does go all the way around, but you can't dismiss a black person's fear of that prejudice just because you've seen prejudice. We have to look at everything all the way around.